The 11th shot rang out across Fort Carson's advanced marksmanship range, and the 11th bullet sailed past its target, missing the steel plate 3,800 meters away by what might as well have been a mile. Master Sergeant Mason stood up from his prone position, his face burning red with anger and humiliation as he ripped his cap from his head and slammed it into the Colorado dirt. "This is impossible," he growled, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of over 200 military personnel who had gathered to witness what was supposed to be a demonstration of American marksmanship excellence. The silence that followed was suffocating. 11 of Fort Carson's most elite marksmen had attempted the shot, and all 11 had failed spectacularly. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the outdoor range, turning the metal bleachers into radiators that cooked the spectators from below, while the September heat pressed down from above. General Patricia Candace, a woman who had earned her 3 stars through 30 years of combat leadership and tactical brilliance, surveyed the crowd with eyes that could freeze water in July. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin of her face, emphasizing the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the disapproving line of her mouth. "Is there anyone else who would like to try?" The general's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a precision blade through silk. "Or are all of Fort Carson's supposedly expert snipers only capable of hitting stationary targets under ideal conditions with no pressure whatsoever?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, acrid and impossible to ignore. The assembled soldiers shifted uncomfortably, some looking at their boots, others pretending to check their phones, anything to avoid making eye contact with the general, whose reputation for breaking careers was as legendary as her tactical genius. From the back of the crowd, where the support staff and logistics personnel had gathered to watch the spectacle from a safe distance, a small hand slowly rose into the air. The movement was so unexpected, so out of place, that it took several seconds for people to notice. When they did, heads turned like dominoes falling, each person nudging their neighbor until all 200 pairs of eyes were focused on the source of that raised hand. "I would like to try, General," came a quiet voice that somehow carried clearly across the range despite its soft tone. The speaker was a woman who stood barely 5'4" in her standard issue boots, with narrow shoulders that suggested she'd never carried anything heavier than a clipboard in her entire military career. Her uniform was that of a supply clerk, the kind worn by people who counted bullets rather than fired them. The name tag read simply Hazel Supply in block letters that seemed almost apologetically small against the tan fabric of her work uniform. Her hands were pale, uncalloused, the kind of hands that spent their days typing requisition forms and signing inventory sheets, not gripping rifle stocks and squeezing triggers. The laughter started slowly, beginning with a snort from one of the junior enlisted men, spreading through the crowd like wildfire through dry grass. Master Sergeant Mason, still standing by his abandoned rifle, let out a bark of laughter that was equal parts disbelief and condescension. "Are you serious right now?" he called out, his voice dripping with the kind of mockery that only comes from wounded pride seeking an easier target. "What are you going to do? Requisition the bullet into the target? Maybe file some paperwork at it?" The crowd's laughter grew louder, more confident now that someone of Mason's rank had given them permission to find humor in the situation. Phones came out, cameras started recording, because this was the kind of moment that would become legendary in the retelling. The tiny supply clerk who thought she could do what 11 trained snipers couldn't. It would be a story told in bars and mess halls for years to come, growing more elaborate with each telling. Hazel stepped forward through the crowd, which parted before her less out of respect than from a desire to give her center stage for what they assumed would be spectacular failure. Her walk was neither confident nor hesitant, just a steady, measured pace that suggested someone who had made a decision and was simply following through on it. As she moved, there was something about her posture, something in the way she held her shoulders and placed her feet, that made Captain Ethan straighten in his seat. He knew something the others didn't, had known it for 3 years since he'd processed certain classified documents that came through his office, but he had kept that knowledge locked away like a loaded weapon in a safe. General Candace watched the small woman approach with an expression that was impossible to read. Her eyes, sharp as winter ice, tracked every movement, cataloging details that others might miss. The way Hazel's eyes automatically scanned the wind indicators along the range. The way her fingers flexed slightly as she looked at the rifle Mason had abandoned. The way she didn't flinch when 200 people laughed at her. "Ma'am," one of the general's aides leaned in close, speaking in a low voice meant only for her superior's ears. Should I stop this? It could be a safety issue if she's not properly trained. The general held up one finger, a simple gesture that meant wait and watch. There was something here, something beneath the surface that her instincts, honed through 3 decades of military service, told her was worth observing. Hazel reached the firing line and stopped, looking down at the precision rifle that Mason had left lying in the dirt like a discarded toy. It was a Barrett MRAD, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, with a Leopold Mark V scope that cost more than most people's cars. The rifle alone weighed almost 15 pounds unloaded, and the scope added another 2. Most people would have struggled just to lift it properly. Before we witness how this quiet supply clerk shattered every assumption about military excellence, tell us where you're watching from. Are you someone who has ever been underestimated because of how you look? If this story of hidden expertise and ultimate vindication resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will prove that true warriors often hide in plain sight. Hazel bent down and picked up the rifle with a motion so smooth and practiced that Captain Ethan actually stood up from his seat. It wasn't the way a clerk would pick up an unfamiliar object. It was muscle memory, pure and simple, the kind that comes from thousands of repetitions, until the action becomes as natural as breathing. She cradled the rifle briefly, her hands automatically finding the balance point, before setting it back down and beginning her inspection. "Look at her," Sergeant Ashley laughed, elbowing her shooting partner. Ashley was one of only 3 female snipers on base, and she wore that distinction like armor against anyone who might question her worth. She had worked twice as hard as any man to earn her position, and seeing this supply clerk playing at being a shooter offended her on a level she couldn't quite articulate. She's holding it like a baby, probably worried she'll break a nail. But Hazel wasn't holding it like a baby. She was conducting a detailed inspection that followed the exact protocols outlined in the Advanced Marksmanship Manual, checking the barrel for obstructions, verifying the scope mount stability, testing the trigger tension. Her movements were economical, efficient, each action flowing into the next without wasted motion or hesitation. When she worked the bolt, the smooth mechanical sound it made suggested hands that knew exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly how fast to cycle the action. Technical Sergeant Connor pushed through the crowd to get a better view. He was the base's ballistics expert, the one who taught the mathematics of long-range shooting to anyone who would listen and many who wouldn't. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the smartest person in any room when it came to the science of sending projectiles over impossible distances. "Ma'am," he called out to Hazel in a voice designed to be heard by everyone, "do you even know what the Coriolis effect is? Or how to calculate ballistic coefficients for different atmospheric conditions?" Hazel looked up from the rifle, meeting Connor's gaze with eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. 3,800 meters, she said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden hush that had fallen over part of the crowd. Wind speed 12 knots from the southwest, gusting to 15. Temperature 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 32%. Elevation 4,800 feet above sea level. Barometric pressure 29.92 inches of mercury. She paused, tilting her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. The Earth will rotate approximately 0.03 degrees during the 4.2 seconds of flight time. Adjustment for Coriolis effect at this latitude, 14 inches right. Connor's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Those weren't numbers someone could just guess. They were precise calculations that took most shooters minutes to work out with calculators and charts. She had rattled them off like she was reading a grocery list, but more than that, she had done it while factoring in variables that most shooters didn't even know existed. Speaking of precision equipment, modern military operations rely heavily on advanced tactical tablets that can calculate ballistics in real time. These ruggedized devices, similar to what Hazel would use for inventory but capable of so much more, feature military-grade encryption and can withstand extreme conditions. They're now being adapted for civilian use in industries requiring precise calculations and secure communications. Hazel moved to the shooting position, dropping to her knees with a controlled descent that spoke of strong legs and perfect balance. She pulled a shooting mat from the range supplies and unrolled it with one smooth motion, the material snapping flat against the ground. As she settled into the prone position, several people noticed something odd. Her movements weren't those of someone trying to remember what they'd been taught. They were the movements of someone whose body knew exactly what to do without conscious thought directing it. $20 says she doesn't even get close, Connor announced loudly, pulling out his wallet and waving the bills in the air. Hell, 50 says she doesn't even hit the berm behind the target. I'll take that bet, Captain Ethan said quietly, but his voice carried enough authority that people turned to look at him. There was something in his expression, a mixture of concern and anticipation, that made some of the smarter spectators wonder what he knew that they didn't. Mason walked over to where Hazel was setting up, standing deliberately close, using his 6'2" frame to loom over her prone form. "You know," he said in a conversational tone that was anything but friendly, "when you miss, and you will miss, spectacularly I might add, you're going to embarrass not just yourself, but every woman who's actually earned the right to hold a rifle in this man's army. Ashley over there," he gestured to the female sniper who was watching with undisguised contempt. "She worked her ass off to get where she is. And here you are, playing dress-up with equipment you can't possibly understand." Hazel didn't respond. She was adjusting the rifle's bipod, setting the legs at slightly different heights to compensate for an almost imperceptible slope in the ground that no one else had noticed. Her breathing had already begun to slow, falling into a rhythm that would have been familiar to any trained sniper, but seemed impossible for a supply clerk who spent her days in an air-conditioned warehouse. General Candace walked closer, her aide following nervously behind. The general's eyes were fixed on Hazel's hands as they made micro-adjustments to the scope. The movements were too precise, too practiced. This wasn't someone following remembered instructions. This was expertise, muscle memory so deep it had become instinct. The general had seen thousands of soldiers handle weapons over her career, and she could read competence like others read books. "Sergeant," the general addressed a nearby NCO who was recording everything on his phone, "what do you know about our supply clerk here?" "Not much, ma'am," the sergeant replied. "She's been here about 3 years, quiet, efficient, keeps to herself. Best inventory accuracy rate on base, actually. Never had a single discrepancy in her counts." The general nodded slowly, filing that information away. Perfect inventory accuracy suggested attention to detail, patience, and the ability to focus on tedious tasks without losing concentration. All qualities that would serve a sniper well, if that's what they were actually watching. Hazel had finished her initial setup and was now doing something that made several experienced shooters in the crowd lean forward. She was reading the wind, but not using any of the electronic devices or flags that dotted the range. Instead, she was watching the grass between her position and the target, observing how it moved in patterns that revealed wind speeds and directions at different distances. She picked up a handful of dirt and let it fall through her fingers, watching how the particles dispersed. She wet one finger and held it up, but not in the amateur way most people did. She was using it to detect the subtle temperature differentials that indicated thermal columns rising from the heated ground. "That's..." Ashley started to say something disparaging, but stopped. What Hazel was doing was advanced technique, the kind of wind reading that wasn't taught in basic sniper school. It was the kind of thing that took years to master, and even then, most shooters preferred to rely on technology rather than trust their instincts. Sergeant Ryan from IT was standing near the back, his laptop balanced on one arm as he ran Hazel's name through various databases. He wasn't supposed to be doing this, but curiosity had gotten the better of him. The first few searches returned exactly what everyone expected. Supply specialist, clean record, no disciplinary actions, no commendations beyond standard good conduct medals. But when he tried to dig deeper, he hit walls, classified walls, redacted walls, the kind of walls that suggested someone had deliberately buried information. "Hey," he whispered to his buddy standing next to him, "there's something weird here. Her file before 3 years ago. It's not just classified. It's gone, like it doesn't exist." His friend glanced at the screen. "Maybe she came from another branch?" "No, you don't understand. There's always a trail, even with transfers. This is different. This is like someone deliberately erased her history." Hazel was now looking through the scope, making tiny adjustments to the windage and elevation knobs. Each click of the adjustment was deliberate, calculated. Those watching closely could see her lips moving slightly, running through calculations that she wasn't sharing with anyone. Her left hand reached up and touched something under her collar, a nervous gesture perhaps, or maybe something else. 2 minutes, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the various conversations happening around her. It wasn't a request or a question, it was a statement. "Wind will shift in 2 minutes. Thermal column from the parking lot will create a brief corridor of stable air." Several people laughed. The parking lot was 800 meters away. The idea that heat rising from parked cars could create a stable air corridor that would affect a shot at 3,800 meters was the kind of thing that only existed in Hollywood movies or the fantasies of people who didn't understand real ballistics. But Connor wasn't laughing. He was pulling out his phone, opening a weather app that showed real-time wind patterns. His face paled slightly as he saw what the advanced meteorological data was suggesting. In approximately 2 minutes, the wind patterns would indeed shift. General Candace moved closer to Captain Ethan. "Captain," she said quietly, "is there something about this soldier that I should know?" Ethan wrestled with his response. He was bound by classification levels and need-to-know protocols, but he was also watching something unprecedented unfold. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I can only say that not everything in a soldier's file tells their whole story." The general's eyes narrowed. That was as close to confirmation as she was going to get without proper clearance. She turned her attention back to Hazel, who had gone completely still. The transformation was remarkable. One moment she had been a person lying on a mat, the next she had become part of the rifle, part of the ground, as immobile as a statue. Her breathing had slowed to the point where it was barely visible. Even her heartbeat, visible to those who knew where to look for the subtle pulse in the neck, had dropped to what seemed like impossibly slow intervals. "This is ridiculous," Mason announced loudly. "She's just lying there, probably trying to remember which end the bullet comes out of." But Ashley had gone quiet. She recognized what she was seeing, even if her pride wouldn't let her admit it. That level of body control, that ability to become perfectly still, was something that took years to develop. She had trained with some of the best snipers in the military, and only a handful could achieve that level of stillness. If you're amazed by what Hazel just demonstrated with that wind reading technique, drop a comment below sharing a time when you surprised everyone with a hidden skill. Don't forget to like this video. It helps us share these incredible military stories with more people who need to hear them. A minute passed, then 90 seconds. The crowd was getting restless, some people starting to mock Hazel for taking so long, suggesting she had frozen up, that reality had finally set in. But the experienced shooters were watching the wind indicators along the range. The flags that had been snapping steadily in one direction were beginning to flutter, to change. The grass patterns were shifting. Even the dust in the air seemed to be moving differently. "Wind call," Hazel whispered, her voice barely audible even to those standing closest. 2 minutes. Her finger moved to the trigger, not pulling yet, just finding the exact spot where the pad of her finger made perfect contact with the curved metal. There was a worn spot there, so subtle that only someone who had fired thousands of rounds would notice it. Her finger found it instantly. Captain Ethan was now standing at the spotting scope, ostensibly to observe the target, but really to watch what he knew was about to happen. He had read the classified files, the ones that came through his office with so many redactions, they looked like black rectangles with occasional words peeking through. But he had pieced together enough to know that Hazel, quiet Hazel from Supply, was not what she appeared to be. 30 seconds, someone called out. Though whether they were timing Hazel's predicted wind shift or just randomly counting, no one was sure. More phones came out. This was going to be either spectacular success or spectacular failure, and either way, it would be worth recording. The supply clerk who thought she could outshoot 11 trained snipers. It was the kind of David versus Goliath story that would go viral, regardless of the outcome. Several people started streaming live to social media, their followers about to witness something unprecedented. Ryan's fingers flew across his keyboard, trying different search parameters, different databases. Then he found something. Not much, just a fragment, a single line in a budget report from 4 years ago. Funds allocated for Ghost 7 operational. The rest was redacted, but that designation, Ghost 7, meant something. Ghost units were the ones that didn't officially exist, the ones whose missions were so classified that even their existence was denied. "Holy," Ryan started to say, but stopped himself. He looked up at Hazel lying prone on the ground, seeing her differently now. If she had been part of a ghost unit, that meant she wasn't just a sniper. She was something beyond that, something that operated in the shadows where even special forces feared to tread. The wind shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable to most people, but to those who were watching the indicators, it was like watching a symphony conductor raise their baton. The flags along the range suddenly aligned, all pointing in the same direction for the first time all morning. The grass stopped its chaotic dance and began moving in uniform waves. Even the dust in the air seemed to pause. suspended in a moment of perfect stillness. Hazel's breathing stopped, not slowed, stopped. She had entered the natural respiratory pause that snipers train years to achieve. That moment between heartbeats where the body is perfectly still, where even the blood in the veins seems to pause in its circulation. Her finger began the slow, steady squeeze that would send a bullet on a journey of 4.2 seconds, across 3,800 meters, through air currents and gravitational pull and the rotation of the Earth itself. The rifle fired. The sound was different from the previous 11 shots, cleaner somehow, as if the bullet knew its destiny and was eager to meet it. The recoil, which had knocked several of the previous shooters off target, barely seemed to affect Hazel. Her body absorbed it like water absorbing a thrown stone, dispersing the energy without moving from her position. 4.2 seconds. In that time, conversations stopped mid-word. People who had been laughing fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause in their morning songs. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the electronic display that would show whether the impossible shot had found its mark. The bullet flew through the morning air, following a parabolic arc that peaked at nearly 60 feet above the direct line of sight. It passed through the wind currents Hazel had read like a map, each one accounted for in her calculations. It compensated for the Earth's rotation, for gravity's pull, for air resistance that changed with altitude and temperature. The display flashed, target hit, dead center. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire world had frozen in disbelief. Then Mason lurched toward the spotting scope, shoving Captain Ethan aside in his desperation to verify what the electronic display was showing. His eye pressed against the eyepiece, and his face went pale. There, in the exact center of the target, centered so perfectly, it looked like it had been placed there by hand, rather than fired from nearly 4,000 meters away, was a hole. That's impossible, Mason stammered. Check it again. The sensors must be malfunctioning. General Candace was already on her radio, calling for verification from the target pit. The response came back immediately. Confirmed hit. Dead center. Perfect shot. The crowd erupted. Not in celebration, but in chaos. People pushing forward to see, others demanding explanations, some insisting it had to be luck, a fluke, anything but what it appeared to be. Phones were thrust into the air, everyone trying to capture the moment when their understanding of the world had shifted. Hazel stood up from her shooting position, and as she did, the movement caused her collar to shift. The fabric, worn from 3 years of daily wear, caught on the rifle sling and tore slightly. It was a small tear, barely noticeable, but it revealed something that made Ryan, still standing with his laptop, drop the computer entirely. There, just visible on the pale skin of her neck, was the edge of a tattoo, black ink in a distinctive pattern that anyone with knowledge of military insignia would recognize. This revelation about Ghost 7 is just the beginning. Subscribe now because tomorrow we're releasing another story about a female veteran whose true identity shocked an entire military base. Click the bell icon to be notified the moment it drops. You won't want to miss what happens next. Ghost 7, Ryan whispered, the words carrying despite his shock. She's Ghost 7. The name rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Some people had no idea what it meant, but others, those with connections to special operations, those who had heard whispers of missions that never happened in places that didn't exist, they knew. Ghost 7 wasn't just a designation, it was a legend. General Candace stood up from where she had been sitting, her movement sharp and sudden. Her voice had gone from skeptical to shocked to something approaching reverence in the span of seconds. She knew that designation. She had signed papers related to it, classified papers that discussed operations so sensitive they were known only by code names and numbers. Ghost 7 had been credited with 47 confirmed kills, including one at 3,450 meters that had saved an entire platoon from annihilation. Ghost 7 had also been blamed for a friendly fire incident in Kandahar in 2019 that had resulted in the death of 3 CIA operatives who were later discovered to have been compromised by enemy intelligence. "Sergeant First Class Hazel," the general said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The use of Hazel's actual rank, a rank that no one on base knew she held, caused another wave of silence to ripple through the crowd. Ghost 7, Kandahar, August 2019. Hazel turned to face the general, her expression unreadable. The tear in her collar had widened, fully revealing the tattoo now. It was a skull with the number 7 incorporated into the design, surrounded by text in Latin that translated to "death from afar." It was the kind of tattoo that wasn't chosen for aesthetics, but earned through actions that most people couldn't imagine. "I was cleared of all charges," Hazel said quietly. "The investigation concluded that the intelligence failure was not my responsibility." "Cleared, but not exonerated," the general replied. "You chose to disappear rather than face the board of inquiry." "I chose to disappear because dead operators tell no tales, and there were people who preferred that narrative." Hazel's voice carried a weight of history, of secrets that could destroy careers and rewrite official records. Mason had staggered backward, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, embarrassment, and something approaching fear. He had just spent the last 20 minutes mocking someone who could have killed him, from distances he couldn't even see. Someone who had been operating at levels of military service that he could only dream of reaching. "You're supposed to be dead," Ashley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The reports said you died in the extraction." "Reports say a lot of things," Hazel replied. "Some of them are even true." Veterans like Hazel often struggle with civilian transition, which is why specialized insurance programs now cover both physical and psychological support for former military personnel. These comprehensive policies include coverage for specialized therapy, career transition assistance, and even protection for those dealing with classified service histories that can't be fully disclosed to regular providers. Captain Ethan finally spoke up. "I've known for 3 years," he admitted. "When she was assigned here, I received a classified briefing. I was told to watch, but not interfere, to let her find whatever peace she could in anonymity." 3 years, Connor said, his voice cracking slightly. 3 years of counting bullets and filing paperwork when you could have been... "When I could have been what?" Hazel interrupted. "Teaching people like you how to shoot? Reliving missions that ended with good people dead? Sometimes the greatest service you can provide is to step aside and let others believe they're the experts." The crowd had formed a circle now, but it wasn't the mocking circle from earlier. This was something else, something almost reverential. These were soldiers who understood what 47 confirmed kills meant. Not just the skill required, but the psychological toll. Each kill was a human life ended, a family destroyed, a soul weight that the shooter carried forever. And Hazel had carried 47 of them, plus the additional burden of being blamed for the death of fellow Americans. General Candace pulled out her phone and made a call. The conversation was brief, conducted in the kind of coded language that suggested classification levels beyond what anyone present was cleared to hear. When she hung up, she turned to face Hazel again. "I've been authorized to make you an offer," the general said. "Full reinstatement at your previous rank, with back pay for the 3 years you've been hiding. Your choice of assignment, anywhere in the world. The Army wants you back, Sergeant. Your country needs people with your skills." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone waited to see what Hazel would say, whether she would accept the redemption being offered or continue her self-imposed exile among the filing cabinets and inventory sheets. Mason, Ashley, Connor, and the others who had mocked her stood frozen, their entire worldview shattered by the revelation of who they had been laughing at. But before Hazel could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. It came from a figure approaching from the parking lot, someone whose arrival had gone unnoticed in the chaos of the moment. The figure wore civilian clothes, but their bearing was unmistakably military. As they got closer, several people recognized him. Colonel Daniel Morrison, retired, former commander of the Army's most elite sniper school, and the man who had trained Ghost 7. "I heard someone was shooting at impossible targets," the colonel said, his weathered face breaking into what might have been a smile. "Figured it had to be you, 7. Nobody else is stupid enough to try or skilled enough to succeed." Part 2. Colonel Morrison's arrival sent a ripple through the assembled crowd that was different from the shock of Hazel's successful shot. This was recognition mixed with reverence, the kind reserved for living legends who had shaped the very foundation of American military marksmanship. His weathered face bore the marks of decades spent in harsh conditions, teaching soldiers not just how to shoot, but how to become extensions of their weapons. The man who had trained Ghost 7 was here, and his presence transformed speculation into certainty. "Colonel Morrison," Hazel said, and for the first time since she'd stepped forward to take the shot, there was something beyond professional detachment in her voice. It wasn't quite warmth, but it was acknowledgement of a bond forged in training grounds where failure meant more than embarrassment. Umbarm, and it meant death. 7, Morrison replied, using her operational designation with the casual familiarity that spoke of countless hours spent together on ranges from Virginia to Afghanistan. When I heard someone made a 3,800-meter shot, I knew it had to be you. Nobody else has that particular combination of skill and stubbornness required to attempt the impossible. The crowd had formed a semicircle now, phones still recording, capturing every word of this unprecedented reunion. Mason stood frozen, his earlier mockery playing on repeat in his mind like a broken record. He had laughed at Ghost 7. He had mocked Ghost 7. He had suggested that Ghost 7 should stick to counting bullets. The humiliation was so complete that he couldn't even process it fully. 3 years in supply, Morrison continued, his eyes scanning Hazel with the analytical gaze of an instructor evaluating a student. That's a long time to pretend to be something you're not. Must have been killing you, watching these weekend warriors play at being snipers while you counted inventory. It had its moments, Hazel repeated, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Humility is a lesson that takes time to learn properly. 3 years seemed about right. General Candace stepped forward, her authority reasserting itself in the situation. Colonel Morrison, I wasn't aware you were in the area. I maintain awareness of certain situations, General, Morrison replied without looking away from Hazel. When one of my shooters goes dark, I keep tabs. When they resurface by making impossible shots that are already trending on social media, I make personal appearances. Ryan's laptop chimed with a notification. Ma'am, he said, his voice cracking slightly. The video has over 2 million views already. News outlets are picking it up. The headline on CNN reads, Mystery Soldier Makes Impossible Shot at Military Base. General Candace's expression tightened. The situation was spiraling beyond a simple training demonstration into a media event that would require careful management. Sergeant First Class Hazel, given these developments, we need to discuss your immediate future. My offer stands. Full reinstatement, back pay, your choice of assignments. But before Hazel could respond, another voice cut through the morning air, this one younger and filled with desperate energy. Ghost 7! Ghost 7! Wait! A young soldier, Private First Class Emma, came running from the administration building, tablet in hand. She was out of breath, having sprinted the entire distance, but her eyes were bright with excitement. Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. It's about Kandahar. The mention of Kandahar fell into the crowd like a grenade. Everyone knew something had happened there, something that had ended Ghost 7's career, but the details were buried under so many classification stamps that even mentioning the location was borderline violation of security protocols. Hazel's expression, which had softened slightly during her conversation with Morrison, immediately hardened back into the mask of professional detachment. Private, whatever you think you've found. It's not what I found, ma'am, Emma interrupted, then immediately looked horrified at her breach of protocol. I mean, sorry, Sergeant First Class, but there's a live stream happening right now. Someone claiming to be from Omega Team. The blood drained from Hazel's face so quickly that Colonel Morrison actually reached out to steady her. Omega Team had been the unit she was providing overwatch for in Kandahar when the friendly fire incident occurred. All 7 members had been reported killed in action, their deaths attributed to a targeting error that had been placed squarely on Ghost 7's shoulders. Emma held up the tablet, and on the screen was a grainy video feed showing a man in civilian clothes sitting in what appeared to be a nondescript room. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but his voice was clear. This message is for Ghost 7. We know you're alive. We know you're at Fort Carson. We know you just made that shot. It's time for the truth about Kandahar to come out. The crowd pressed closer, everyone straining to see the small screen. General Candace immediately pulled out her phone, undoubtedly calling for intelligence verification. Colonel Morrison's expression had gone from weathered calm to sharp attention. This was no longer just about a disgraced sniper making a comeback. This was about secrets that could reshape understanding of one of the military's most controversial incidents. The man on the screen continued. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen. No, Connor breathed from his position in the crowd. Marcus Chen died in Kandahar. I knew him. I was at his memorial service. And I was Omega 2. For 3 years, I've been listed as KIA, another casualty of a mission gone wrong. But the mission didn't go wrong. It went exactly as certain people planned. Ghost 7, you didn't miss your target that night. You hit exactly what you were told to hit. The problem was that someone wanted you to hit it. Hazel took the tablet from Emma's shaking hands, her own grip steady despite the earthquake of revelations shaking her world. The face on the screen was older, marked by experiences that suggested the 3 years since Kandahar hadn't been spent in comfortable hiding. But she recognized the voice, the slight Boston accent that Marcus had never quite shaken despite years in the military. "This can't be real," Ashley said, her earlier antagonism completely forgotten in the face of this larger drama. Dead soldiers don't come back to life and start live streaming accusations. If you're amazed by what Hazel just demonstrated with that wind reading technique, drop a comment below, sharing a time when you surprised everyone with a hidden skill. Don't forget to like this video. It helps us share these incredible military stories with more people who need to hear them. "Marcus," Hazel said to the screen, though the feed was one way and he couldn't hear her. Her voice carried a weight of guilt that 3 years hadn't diminished. "I thought I killed you." The stream continued. Omega Team was sent to eliminate a target that military intelligence had identified as a terrorist cell leader. What they didn't tell us, what they didn't tell Ghost 7, was that the target was actually a CIA asset who had outlived his usefulness. Someone wanted him gone, but needed plausible deniability. What better way than to have America's best sniper accidentally eliminate him in a friendly fire incident? General Candace lowered her phone, her expression grim. "I've just confirmed with intelligence. The biometric markers match. That's really Marcus Chen. Somehow, he's alive." "But how?" Mason asked, his earlier humiliation temporarily forgotten in the face of this larger mystery. "The compound was destroyed. Satellite imagery confirmed total destruction." Morrison spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many official stories unravel. "Satellite imagery shows what someone wants it to show. If Chen is alive, if any of Omega Team survived, then everything about Kandahar needs to be re-examined." The crowd had grown during the stream. Soldiers who had been heading to morning training had stopped, drawn by the commotion and staying for the revelation. The commanding officer of Fort Carson, Brigadier General James Mitchell, had arrived, along with several other high-ranking officers. This was no longer just a shooting demonstration gone viral. This was becoming a matter of national security. On the screen, Marcus Chen continued his revelation. 3 of us survived that night. Omega 2, 4, and 6. We've been in hiding, not from foreign enemies, but from elements within our own government who needed us to stay dead. But when we saw that shot, when we realized Ghost 7 was alive and had come out of hiding, we knew it was time. "Time for what?" someone in the crowd asked, though Chen couldn't hear them. As if anticipating the question, Chen said, "Time to expose the truth. The intelligence failure wasn't a failure. It was a success. Someone wanted that CIA asset dead, wanted Ghost 7 discredited, and wanted Omega Team silenced. They got 2 out of 3, but now we're going to name names." General Candace immediately gestured to her aide. "Shut down that stream. This is classified information being broadcast publicly." "Ma'am," the aide replied, frantically working his phone, "I can't. It's not coming through our servers. It's being broadcast from multiple mirror sites simultaneously. Someone with serious technical knowledge set this up." Hazel stared at the screen, her mind racing through the implications. If Marcus was telling the truth, and every instinct she had said he was, then her entire understanding of the worst night of her life had been wrong. She hadn't failed in her duty. She had succeeded too well, becoming a tool for someone's political manipulation and then being discarded when the tool had served its purpose. 7, Morrison said quietly. "You need to respond to this. If Chen is really alive, if what he's saying is true, then you're not just vindicated. You're a witness to something much larger." "I know," Hazel replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But responding means stepping fully back into that world. Once I acknowledge this, there's no going back to being a supply clerk. There's no going back to hiding. You already gave that up when you made that shot," Morrison pointed out. "The only question now is whether you control the narrative or let others control it for you." On the screen, Marcus was wrapping up his broadcast. "Ghost 7, if you're watching this, know that we never blamed you. We knew from the beginning that something was wrong with that mission. We've spent 3 years gathering evidence, and now we're ready to present it. But we need you. You're the only one who can verify the kill order, who can confirm what you were told versus what actually happened. There's a number at the bottom of this screen. Call it. Let's finish what started in Kandahar." The The stream ended, replaced by a phone number that Hazel recognized as having a Virginia area code, Langley, CIA headquarters. 600. This was either the most elaborate trap ever set, or Marcus Chen was more connected than anyone had imagined. Veterans like Hazel often struggle with civilian transition, which is why specialized insurance programs now cover both physical and psychological support for former military personnel. These comprehensive policies include coverage for specialized therapy, career transition assistance, and even protection for those dealing with classified service histories that can't be fully disclosed to regular providers. General Mitchell, the base commander, finally spoke up. Sergeant First Class Hazel, given the sensitivity of this situation, I need you to come with me for a full debrief. This has implications far beyond a simple shooting demonstration. With respect, sir, Hazel replied, I've been debriefed, investigated, and interrogated about Kandahar more times than I can count. Each time, the conclusion was the same: intelligence failure, my responsibility, case closed. If Marcus Chen is alive, if Omega team members survived, then those debriefs were either incompetent or deliberately misleading. Are you suggesting that military intelligence deliberately, Mitchell began? I'm not suggesting anything, sir, Hazel interrupted. I'm stating that dead men don't typically start live streaming unless something is fundamentally wrong with the official story. The crowd was growing restless. This was beyond anything they had expected to witness. They had come to see elite soldiers fail at an impossible shot, had stayed to see a supply clerk make that shot, and were now witnessing the unraveling of a military cover-up that reached into the highest levels of intelligence and defense. Connor had been working his phone, his technical expertise coming into play. The stream originated from inside the United States, he announced. Multiple VPN layers, but the base signature is domestic. Whoever Marcus Chen is, or whoever is claiming to be him, they're not hiding in Pakistan or some dark site. They're here. How do you know that? General Candace demanded. Connor looked uncomfortable but answered, I may have some skills that aren't entirely official. Let's just say that before I became a ballistics expert, I had other interests that involved computers and networks. Ashley had remained silent through most of the revelations, but now she spoke up. If this is true, if Ghost 7 was set up, then how many other operations have been compromised? How many other soldiers have been sacrificed for political games? It was the question everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. The military operated on trust in leadership, trust in intelligence, trust that the missions they were sent on were legitimate. If that trust was broken, if soldiers were being used as pawns in larger games, then everything they believed in was suspect. Mason, who had been silent since his humiliation, finally found his voice. Sergeant First Class Hazel, he said formally, what do you need from us? The question surprised everyone, including Hazel. She turned to look at him, seeing not the arrogant sniper who had mocked her, but a soldier who was offering support to a superior who had been wronged. What I need, Hazel said slowly, is for everyone to understand that what's happening here is bigger than one person's vindication. If Marcus is right, if Omega Team was deliberately targeted, then we're talking about treason at the highest levels. People are going to try to bury this, to discredit Marcus, to paint me as bitter and delusional. They have the power to destroy careers and lives. So what do we do? Emma asked, her young voice cutting through this complexity with simple directness. Hazel looked around at the assembled crowd, soldiers, officers, support staff, all waiting for her answer. These were people who had laughed at her less than an hour ago, who had dismissed her as a nobody playing with equipment beyond her understanding. Now they were looking to her for leadership in a situation that none of them fully comprehended. First, Hazel said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of making life and death decisions, we document everything. Every video, every recording, every witness statement. This isn't going to be buried in classification. Too many people have seen and heard too much. She pulled out her phone, the standard issue one that she used for regular communications, not the encrypted devices hidden in her quarters. She dialed the number Marcus had displayed, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered. 7, is that really you? It was Marcus, no question about it. The same voice that had called out target confirmations during dozens of operations. The same slight hesitation on the S sounds that came from a childhood speech impediment but mostly overcome. Marcus, Hazel said, her voice thick with emotions she couldn't quite categorize. "We were told you were dead, all of Omega Team. Dead. 3 of us made it out, 7. Barely, but we made it. We've been underground, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Your shot today, going public like that, it was the sign we were waiting for." "Who else?" Hazel asked. "You said Omega 2, 4, and 6. Myself, Rodriguez, and Kim. Park, Johnson, Thompson, and Williams. They didn't make it, but their deaths weren't your fault, 7. They were dead before your shot ever fired. The compound was rigged to blow regardless. You were just the excuse they needed." The crowd had pressed closer, everyone straining to hear this impossible conversation between the living and the supposedly dead. General Candace was furiously texting, probably trying to verify everything through her intelligence channels. Colonel Morrison stood like a statue, his face revealing nothing but his eyes sharp with attention. "Marcus," Hazel said, "are you somewhere safe? If what you're saying is true, if you have evidence, then you're in danger." A dry laugh came through the speaker. 7. "We've been in danger for 3 years, but yeah, we're safe. We had help. There are people inside the system who knew what happened was wrong, who've been protecting us and helping us build our case." "Who?" General Candace demanded, stepping closer to the phone. "Who inside the system?" "General Candace," Marcus said, apparently recognizing her voice. "With respect, ma'am, that's information I'll only share with 7, and only in person. We've learned the hard way that phones, even encrypted ones, aren't secure when you're dealing with people who have NSA resources." "This is a matter of national security," Candace insisted. "Yes, ma'am, it is," Marcus agreed, "which is why we're being careful. 7. There's a coffee shop in Colorado Springs called The Grindhouse. Can you be there at 1400 hours today? Come alone." "Negative," Morrison interjected. "If 7 goes anywhere, she goes with backup. This could be a trap." "Colonel Morrison," Marcus said, a note of surprise in his voice. "You're there too? Good. You should know that the trap already sprung 3 years ago. We're just trying to help everyone see it now." "Marcus," Hazel said, "I'll be there. 1400 hours. 7, one more thing," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "They're going to try to stop this. The people who set us up, they have resources, connections. The moment this call ends, they're going to start moving against us. Watch your back." The line went dead. For a moment, no one spoke. The magnitude of what they had just witnessed, a conversation with a ghost, evidence of a conspiracy, the promise of revelations that could shake the military establishment, left everyone stunned. Then, as if a dam had broken, everyone started talking at once. General Mitchell raised his voice above the chaos. "Everyone who is not directly involved in this situation, return to your duties immediately. This is now a classified matter under investigation." But it was too late for classification. Too many people had recorded the shot, the revelation of Ghost 7's identity, the conversation with Marcus Chen. Within hours, it would be on every military blog, every social media platform, every news outlet that could get their hands on it. "Sergeant First Class Hazel," Mitchell continued, "I'm ordering you not to attend that meeting. This needs to go through proper channels." "With respect, sir," Hazel replied, "proper channels are what got 7 good soldiers reportedly killed and me exiled to a supply depot for 3 years. I'm going to that meeting." "I could have you arrested," Mitchell warned. "You could," Hazel agreed. "But imagine the headlines. Army arrests Ghost 7 for trying to meet with soldiers they claimed were dead. I don't think that's the kind of publicity the Army wants right now." General Candace stepped in. "General Mitchell, perhaps we should consider that Sergeant First Class Hazel might be our best option here. She's the only one Marcus Chen seems willing to trust. If we want to know what really happened in Kandahar, we need that meeting to happen." "Then she goes with protection," Mitchell insisted. "I'll go with her," Morrison said. "It wasn't a request." "As will I," Mason said, surprising everyone again. "I may have been an idiot earlier, but I'm still one of the best shooters on this base. If Sergeant First Class Hazel needs Overwatch, I volunteer. And I'll handle electronic surveillance," Connor added. "Make sure nobody's tracking her digitally." Ashley nodded. "I'm in too. You need someone watching the approaches to that coffee shop." One by one, the very people who had mocked Hazel an hour ago were volunteering to protect her. It was a complete reversal, born from respect for her skills, but more importantly from outrage at how she had been treated by the system they all served. General Candace looked around at the volunteers, then at General Mitchell. It seems Sergeant First Class Hazel has assembled her own team. Given the circumstances, I recommend we allow this to proceed, with appropriate monitoring and backup from official channels. Mitchell clearly wanted to object, but he could see which way the wind was blowing. Too many people had witnessed this. Too many were now invested in learning the truth. Fine, he said finally. But this is a sanctioned operation as of now. Sergeant First Class Hazel, you were temporarily reinstated to active operational status. Colonel Morrison, you were recalled to active duty to oversee this mission. The rest of you are now under military intelligence command for the duration of this operation. It was as official as it was going to get. Hazel looked around at her impromptu team, soldiers who had gone from mocking her to supporting her in the span of an hour. It wasn't the team she would have chosen, but it was the team she had. "All right," she said, taking command with the natural authority that had made her Ghost 7. "Mason, I need you to scout the coffee shop location. Multiple firing positions, escape routes. Ashley, you're on counter surveillance. Anyone watching that shop, I want to know about it. Connor, full electronic sweep. I want to know every camera, every microphone, every digital signature in a 3-block radius." They nodded, accepting orders from someone they now recognized as a superior operator despite her years in supply. The transformation was complete. Ghost 7 was back, not as a lone sniper, but as a team leader. This revelation about Ghost 7 is just the beginning. Subscribe now because tomorrow we're releasing another story about a female veteran whose true identity shocked an entire military base. Click the bell icon to be notified the moment it drops. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Hazel found herself standing with Morrison, looking out over the range where her shot had started this avalanche of revelations. "You know this isn't going to end well," Morrison said quietly. "People with the power to fake deaths and bury operations don't give up easily." "I know," Hazel replied, "but I've spent 3 years carrying the guilt of 7 deaths. If even one of them is alive, if there's even a chance of exposing what really happened, I have to take it. And if it's a trap, then I spring it," Hazel said simply. "Better to know the truth and face the consequences than to keep hiding from a lie." Morrison nodded slowly. "The 7 I trained would have taken the shot and disappeared. You've grown." 3 years of counting bullets gives you time to think," Hazel replied with a bitter smile, "about shots taken and not taken, about orders followed and prices paid, about the difference between being a weapon and being a warrior. And which are you now?" Hazel looked at her hands, steady and strong, hands that had delivered death across impossible distances and filed inventory reports with equal precision. "I'm whatever I need to be to get those men home and expose whoever did this." The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the last of the dawn mist. The range where 11 snipers had failed and 1 supply clerk had succeeded was now empty except for the 2 of them. But Hazel knew that within hours it would be famous, or infamous, as the place where Ghost 7 returned from the dead. 6 hours remained until the meeting at the grindhouse. 6 hours to prepare for a confrontation 3 years in the making. 6 hours to ready herself for truths that might be worse than the lies she'd been living with. But as Hazel walked off the range, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Kandahar: purpose. Not the simple purpose of following orders or making shots, but the complex purpose of seeking justice in a world that preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. The preparation for the meeting took on the intensity of a combat operation. In a secure conference room that General Mitchell had reluctantly provided, Hazel's improvised team worked with the efficiency of people who understood that lives, possibly their own, were at stake. Connor had set up a mobile command center with multiple laptops, satellite feeds, and communication equipment that definitely wasn't standard military issue. "The Grindhouse is a small coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Main in Colorado Springs," he reported, pulling up satellite imagery and street view photos. "Single story, glass front, 2 entrances, front and back through the kitchen. Residential buildings on both sides, office building across the street." "Sightlines?" Hazel asked, studying the imagery. 3 optimal positions," Mason replied, having returned from his reconnaissance. "The office building roof gives full coverage of the front entrance and most of the interior through the windows. There's an apartment building 2 blocks north that covers the back alley. And there's a parking garage to the east that provides overwatch of all approach routes." "Too many," Morrison observed. "If someone wanted to set up an ambush, this would be perfect." Multiple firing positions, limited escape routes, civilian casualties to complicate any response. Which is probably why Marcus chose it, Hazel said. He knows I'd recognize the tactical situation. He's testing whether I'll still come despite the risks. Ashley had been monitoring social media and news outlets. The video of your shot has 15 million views now. News crews are already gathering at the base gates. Everyone wants to know who Ghost 7 is and what really happened in Kandahar. Good, Hazel said. The more public this becomes, the harder it is for anyone to make us disappear. Or the more pressure there is to silence us before we can reveal anything, Morrison countered. General Candace entered the room, her expression grim. We have a problem. My intelligence contacts are being stonewalled. Every query about Marcus Chen or Omega Team is being blocked at levels way above my pay grade. Someone very powerful doesn't want this information getting out. Then we're on the right track, Hazel said. You only encounter that kind of resistance when you're close to something important. Emma, who had been assigned as their liaison despite her junior rank, knocked and entered. Ma'am, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Captain Nathan Park, Judge Advocate General's Corps. A military lawyer. Hazel's expression hardened. Let me guess. Cease and desist? Captain Park entered, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of precise bearing that suggested he dotted every I and crossed every T in his life. Sergeant First Class Hazel, I'm here to inform you that any disclosure of classified information relating to Operation Overwatch, specifically the events of August 12, 2019 in Kandahar, Afghanistan, would be a violation of your security clearance and subject to prosecution under the Espionage Act. Operation Overwatch, Hazel said slowly. That's interesting. 3 years ago, it was called Operation Vigilant Shield. Last year, in the declassified reports, it was referred to as Operation Mountain Guardian. Now it's Operation Overwatch. Tell me, Captain, why does a single operation keep changing names? Park's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I wouldn't know about that, Sergeant. I'm simply here to remind you of your legal obligations. My legal obligations, Hazel repeated, like my obligation to report war crimes, my obligation to protect fellow soldiers, my obligation to tell the truth under oath? Which obligation would you like me to prioritize, Captain? I'd advise you to prioritize not spending the rest of your life in federal prison, Park replied stiffly. Morrison stood up slowly, his presence filling the room. Captain, I've been in this army for 35 years. I've seen plenty of operations go sideways, plenty of cover-ups and classified embarrassments, but I've never seen dead soldiers come back to life and start streaming accusations on the internet. So maybe, just maybe, you should be less concerned about threatening the people trying to uncover the truth and more concerned about the people who buried it in the first place. Park adjusted his glasses nervously. I'm just doing my job, Colonel. So were the guards at Nuremberg, Morrison replied coldly. Doesn't make it right. Park left quickly after that, but his visit had confirmed what they all suspected. Someone very powerful was very worried about what might be revealed. As the time for the meeting approached, Hazel suited up in civilian clothes, but with tactical gear underneath. Kevlar vest, concealed carry sidearm, communication earpiece, GPS tracker. She looked like someone heading out for coffee, but she was equipped for war. Remember, Morrison said as they prepared to leave, if this goes bad, priority is getting you out alive. Whatever evidence Marcus has, it's worthless without you to corroborate it. No, Hazel said firmly. Priority is getting the truth. I've spent 3 years living with lies. If I have to die to expose them, so be it. That's not happening, Mason said with surprising vehemence. I spent this morning mocking a hero. I'm not letting that hero die this afternoon. The drive to Colorado Springs was tense. Hazel rode with Morrison in an unmarked vehicle, while the others spread out in separate cars, taking different routes to avoid creating a convoy that might attract attention. Connor monitored electronic signatures, watching for any sign of surveillance or interference. I've got something, Connor reported over the secure comm channel. 3 vehicles have been maintaining consistent distance behind you for the last 10 miles. Professional tail job. They're rotating positions to avoid detection. Hostiles? Morrison asked. Unknown, but they're not amateurs, military or intelligence training for sure. Let them follow, Hazel decided. Better to know where they are than to lose them and wonder. They arrived at the grindhouse 30 minutes early. Ashley and Mason were already in position, having arrived separately and established overwatch. The coffee shop was exactly as Connor had described: small, exposed, tactically terrible, which made it perfect for ensuring everyone could see what happened there. "I've got eyes on 3 possibles," Ashley reported. "Man in a blue sedan who has been reading the same newspaper page for 15 minutes. Woman with a laptop who keeps looking at the door instead of her screen. And someone on the office building roof who thinks they're hidden but their scope is reflecting sunlight." "Weapons?" Hazel asked. "Can't confirm, but they're all positioned for rapid response." "So, either protection or elimination," Morrison observed. "Marcus has friends, or enemies, or both." "Only one way to find out," Hazel said, opening the car door. She walked into the grindhouse exactly at 1400 hours. The coffee shop was half full, normal afternoon crowd of students, remote workers, and people grabbing caffeine between errands. None of them knew they were potentially in the crossfire of a 3-year-old conspiracy coming to light. Marcus Chen was sitting in the back corner, positioned where he could see both entrances but also be seen from the street. Smart positioning, visible enough that killing him would have witnesses, protected enough that he couldn't be grabbed easily. He looked older than his years, gray streaking through hair that had been solid black in Kandahar. When he saw Hazel, his face cycled through emotions: relief, guilt, anger, and finally, resolution. "7, he said as she sat down across from him. "You look good for someone who's been dead for 3 years." "Same to you," Hazel replied. "Though technically you've been dead longer." "Yeah, about that," Marcus said, pulling out a tablet from his bag. "Before we start, I need to know, are you recording this?" "My entire team is listening," Hazel said honestly, "and probably half the intelligence community by now. Your stream this morning made sure this couldn't stay quiet." "Good," Marcus said. "The more people who know, the safer we all are." He activated the tablet, which displayed a series of documents, photos, and video files. "This is 3 years of evidence gathering. 3 years of proving that Kandahar wasn't a mistake, it was a murder." The advanced ballistics knowledge Hazel demonstrated comes from specialized training programs that are now available online. These courses, originally designed for military snipers, teach everything from atmospheric pressure calculations to the Coriolis effect. Many veterans are using these certifications to transition into civilian careers in precision industries, engineering, and even meteorology. Marcus opened the first file, a classified operations order that should have been destroyed years ago. "This is the original mission briefing for Omega Team. Notice the target designation: High-Value Target Alpha, Suspected Terrorist Cell Leader Ahmad Rashidi." "I remember," Hazel said. "I had his photo memorized. 52 years old, gray beard, scar across his left eyebrow." "Except Ahmad Rashidi didn't exist," Marcus said, opening another file. "This is from CIA archives, leaked to us by someone with a conscience. The man in that photo was actually Dmitry Volkov, a Russian intelligence officer who had been turned by the CIA in 2015. He was feeding information about Russian operations in Afghanistan, invaluable intel that was saving American lives." Hazel felt cold despite the warm afternoon. "I killed a CIA asset." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You killed someone the CIA wanted dead." Volkov had started playing both sides, selling information to the highest bidder. The agency wanted him eliminated, but couldn't do it officially without admitting they'd been running an unauthorized operation in Afghanistan. So they fed false intel to military intelligence, designated him as a terrorist, and put him in Ghost 7's crosshairs. "And Omega Team?" Marcus's expression darkened. "We were witnesses. We were never supposed to survive that night. The compound was rigged with explosives before we even arrived. The plan was simple. Ghost 7 takes the shot, eliminates Volkov, the compound explodes, Omega Team dies in a terrorist attack, and you take the fall for bad intelligence leading to friendly fire. Clean, simple. Everyone who could contradict the official story is dead or discredited. But you survived. 3 of us, barely. Rodriguez saw the explosives during entry, recognized them as American-made. We had maybe 30 seconds to get out before the place went up. Park, Johnson, Thompson, and Williams, they were deeper in the compound. They never had a chance." Hazel's hands clenched into fists. 4 good soldiers dead not from enemy action, but from betrayal by their own side. Who? Who authorized this? Marcus pulled up another document, this one so heavily redacted it was mostly black bars. That's the billion-dollar question. The authorization came from someone high enough to coordinate between CIA, military intelligence, and special operations. We've narrowed it down to maybe 5 people with that kind of access and authority. Names, Hazel demanded. Not here, Marcus said, glancing around. Too public, too many ears. But I can tell you that one of them is in this coffee shop right now. Hazel's blood ran cold. She kept her expression neutral, but activated her calm. All units, we have a potential hostile in the building. Unknown identity, presumably high-value target. Through her earpiece, she heard Mason. 7, you need to see this. Blue sedan just disgorged 4 men in tactical gear. They're not trying to hide anymore. Ashley added, office building sniper is repositioning. Looks like they're setting up for a shot. Marcus, Hazel said quietly, we need to go. Now. But Marcus shook his head. No, this is exactly what needs to happen. They're going to move on us, here, in public, with dozens of witnesses and probably twice as many phone cameras. Let them show their hand. The front door of the coffee shop opened, and a man in an expensive suit walked in. Hazel recognized him immediately. Deputy Director Harold Morrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Not related to Colonel Morrison despite the shared surname, Harold was everything the colonel wasn't. Political, ambitious, and utterly without battlefield experience. Sergeant First Class Hazel, Harold said smoothly, approaching their table. Mr. Chen, what an unexpected surprise to find you both here. Not that unexpected, Marcus replied. Considering you've been tracking us since this morning, Harold smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. You're trafficking in classified information, Mr. Chen. That's a serious crime. Murder is a more serious crime, Hazel interjected, especially when it's American soldiers being murdered by their own government. The coffee shop had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, some openly recording on their phones. Harold noticed and his smile tightened. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. I think public is perfect, Hazel said loudly enough for everyone to hear. After all, Deputy Director Morrison, you're about to arrest 2 American soldiers for trying to expose a conspiracy that got 4 others killed. That's something the public should see. Through her earpiece, Connor's voice was urgent. 7, I'm tracking multiple emergency response units converging on your location. Whatever's about to happen, law enforcement is already en route. Harold's hand moved toward his jacket, and immediately, every trained person in the room reacted. Hazel's hand went to her concealed weapon. Marcus ducked sideways, and from somewhere in the crowd of civilians, 3 other figures moved with military precision. Federal agents, someone shouted. Everyone freeze! The coffee shop erupted in chaos. Civilians scrambled for exits while multiple people claiming different authorities pointed weapons at each other. In the confusion, Hazel saw Harold Morrison reach for something that wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. He was trying to trigger something. Without thinking, Hazel moved. Her hand shot out, striking Harold's wrist with the kind of precise force that had taken years to perfect. The phone went flying, skittering across the floor. Harold's eyes widened in shock and pain, but before he could react, Hazel had him in a control hold, his arm twisted behind his back. Dead man switch? She asked conversationally. Were you going to blow something up, Deputy Director? Maybe finish the job you started in Kandahar? You're assaulting a federal officer, Harold gasped. And you're a traitor who murdered American soldiers, Hazel replied. I'll take my chances with a jury. The chaos in the coffee shop resolved into a tense standoff. Federal agents, local police, military personnel, and at least 2 unidentified groups all had weapons drawn, all claiming authority, none sure who to trust. It was the kind of situation that could explode into bloodshed with one wrong move. Then Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a drill sergeant on a parade ground. Everyone stand down! Weapons lowered now! The colonel entered through the front door, flanked by General Candace and, surprisingly, General Mitchell. Behind them came what looked like an entire platoon of military police. The federal agents hesitated, unsure of jurisdiction. The local police looked relieved to have someone else taking charge. Deputy Director Morrison, General Candace said formally, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You don't have authority, Harold began. Actually, she does, General Mitchell interrupted, producing a document. Emergency authorization from the Secretary of Defense. Signed 10 minutes ago, after reviewing the evidence Mr. Chen provided. It seems your dead man switch wasn't the only recording device active today. Connor's voice came through the earpiece. 7, check the news. We're live on every major network. Indeed, the confrontation was being broadcast live, streamed by dozens of phones, and picked up by news networks. The attempted arrest of Ghost 7 had become a national event. Marcus stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. 3 years ago, Deputy Director Morrison coordinated the murder of 4 American soldiers and the attempted murder of 3 others to cover up an illegal CIA operation. He destroyed the career of one of America's best snipers to hide his crimes. Today that ends. Harold Morrison's face had gone from red to white. You can't prove anything. It's all classified, all deniable. Except for this, Marcus said, pulling out a small drive from his pocket. Audio recordings of you discussing the operation with your CIA counterpart. Video of you meeting with the demolitions expert who rigged the compound. Financial records showing payments to private contractors for cleanup operations. 3 years is a long time to gather evidence, Harold. How? Harold whispered. Omega-4, Rodriguez, survived with severe burns but intact memory. He remembered seeing you at Forward Operating Base Chapman 2 days before the mission. You weren't supposed to be in Afghanistan at all. That's what started our investigation. Every thread we pulled led back to you. Hazel released Harold into the custody of the military police. As they cuffed him, she asked the question that had haunted her for 3 years. Why? Why kill your own people? Harold looked at her with contempt despite his situation. Volkov had information that would have exposed decades of illegal operations. Wars started on false pretenses, allies betrayed, enemies created to justify budgets. The entire house of cards would have collapsed. 4 soldiers, even 7 soldiers, was a small price to pay to protect national security. That wasn't your call to make, Hazel said quietly. They trusted the system, trusted their leadership, trusted that their sacrifice meant something. You betrayed all of that. As Harold was led away, the coffee shop slowly returned to some semblance of normal. Civilians who had fled were peering back in, phones still recording. The various law enforcement agencies were sorting out jurisdiction. And in the middle of it all, Hazel stood with Marcus, 2 ghosts finally freed from their haunting. The other 2, Hazel asked, Rodriguez and Kim, where are they? Safe, Marcus assured her. Watching this on TV, probably, laughing their asses off at Harold's face when you dropped him. They wanted to be here, but we agreed that keeping them in reserve was smarter, just in case this went badly. It almost did. That dead man switch would have detonated charges in the office building across the street. We found them this morning, disarmed them an hour ago. Harold was always too fond of explosives as a solution. Hazel looked at him sharply. You knew? You knew about the charges and didn't tell me? Would you have come if you knew? Marcus asked. We needed this to happen publicly, needed Harold to expose himself. You were never in danger, 7. My team, what's left of it, we've gotten good at this kind of operation. 3 years of practice. Through the chaos, Mason, Ashley, and Connor had made their way to Hazel's position. They looked shell-shocked, but determined, the kind of expression soldiers got when reality exceeded training. So, Mason said, attempting levity, this is a normal day for Ghost 7? Actually, Hazel replied, this is pretty unusual. Most of my days involved a lot more math and a lot less arresting deputy directors. General Candace approached, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. Sergeant First Class Hazel, we need to discuss your future. Harold Morrison's arrest is just the beginning. There's going to be investigations, trials, testimony. The conspiracy he was part of reaches into multiple agencies. We need someone who understands the operational side to help unravel it. Respectfully, ma'am, Hazel said, I've been unraveling conspiracies for about 6 hours now. I'd like to go back to something simpler. Counting bullets? Candace asked with a slight smile. Teaching, Hazel replied. You mentioned that earlier, training the next generation, making sure they're prepared not just for the enemies in front of them, but the ones behind them too. Morrison stepped forward. The Advanced Marksmanship Training Program needs a director, someone who understands both the technical and tactical sides of long-range operations. Interested? Hazel looked around the coffee shop that had become a battlefield, at the team that had formed spontaneously around her, at Marcus, who had risked everything to expose the truth. On one condition, The program includes training on identifying and reporting illegal orders, on protecting yourself from your own chain of command when necessary, on surviving not just enemy action, but institutional betrayal. That's a big ask, General Mitchell said. You're talking about fundamentally changing how we train soldiers. I'm talking about preventing another Kandahar, Hazel replied. Another Ghost 7, another Omega team. If my experience can keep even one soldier from going through what we went through, it's worth it. The generals exchanged glances, conducting one of those silent conversations that high-ranking officers perfect over years of service. Finally, Candace nodded. Agreed. The program is yours to design and implement. Full autonomy within reasonable parameters. If Hazel's choice between revenge and redemption moved you, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Check out the next video on your screen about another underestimated warrior whose moment of truth left everyone speechless. Click now before it ends. 6 months later, the trial of Harold Morrison and his co-conspirators had become the most watched military legal proceeding in history. Hazel had testified for 3 days, recounting every detail of that night in Kandahar, every shot taken, every order followed. Her testimony, combined with the evidence Marcus and his team had gathered, resulted in convictions that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. But more importantly, at Fort Carson, the Ghost 7 Advanced Marksmanship Academy had opened its doors. The name had been Hazel's choice, a reminder that even ghosts could come back, that even the buried truth could be resurrected. The first class included Mason, Ashley, and Connor, who had insisted on being part of the inaugural program, despite already knowing much of what would be taught. Today, Hazel addressed her first class, standing in the same briefing room where she had been dismissed as a supply clerk 6 months earlier. You're going to learn that being a sniper isn't just about making impossible shots. It's about knowing when not to shoot. It's about questioning orders that don't make sense. It's about protecting not just your fellow soldiers' lives, but their honor. She turned on the projector, which displayed a photo of Omega Team, all 7 members, taken a week before Kandahar. These men trusted the system. 4 of them died because of that trust. Your job, our job, is to be worthy of that trust while never being blind to its potential for betrayal. Mason raised his hand. Ma'am, how do we tell the difference between a lawful order we don't like and an unlawful order we shouldn't follow? It was the question Hazel had been asking herself for 3 years. You learn to trust your instincts, to ask questions, to demand clarity. And when all else fails, you remember that your oath is to the Constitution and the people of the United States, not to any individual or agency. The class continued, covering ballistics and breathing techniques, wind reading, and range estimation. But woven throughout the technical instruction were lessons on ethics, on institutional awareness, on survival skills that had nothing to do with enemy combatants and everything to do with navigating military bureaucracy. Rodriguez and Kim had quietly rejoined the military, their deaths officially reversed in what the media called the Lazarus Papers. They occasionally guest lectured at the academy, sharing their perspectives on survival, both physical and psychological. Marcus Chen had taken a position with the Inspector General's office, investigating other potential cases of institutional betrayal. His first report, classified but leaked within days, suggested that Kandahar was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that stretched back decades. As for Hazel, she found peace not in anonymity or exile, but in purpose. Every morning, she stood at the range where she had made the 3,800-meter shot that had started everything, watching new students attempt impossible shots of their own. Some succeeded, most failed, but all learned that the most important battles weren't always against distant enemies, but against the corruption and complacency that could rot an institution from within. One evening, as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across Fort Carson, Emma approached Hazel with a tablet. "Ma'am, you need to see this." On the screen was another live stream, this one from a location Hazel didn't recognize. A figure in shadows, voice electronically modified, spoke directly to the camera. "This message is for Ghost 7 and all those who think the conspiracy ended with Harold Morrison. It didn't. It goes deeper, reaches higher. The House of Cards is still standing, and some of us want to bring it down. If you're interested in finishing what you started, respond to this message. Pandora's box is already open. The question is whether you want to control what comes out." Hazel stared at the screen as the stream ended, replaced by another phone number, another invitation to step back into the shadows. She thought about the academy she had built, the students she was training, the peace she had found in teaching rather than shooting. Then she thought about the 4 members of Omega Team who hadn't survived, about all the other soldiers who might have been sacrificed for someone's political games, about the conspiracies that still festered in the darkness. She picked up her phone and began to dial. Some ghosts, it seemed, were never meant to rest. And Ghost 7, the supply clerk who had made an impossible shot and exposed an impossible conspiracy, still had work to do. The shot that had started everything was, perhaps, just the beginning. As her call connected and a familiar voice answered, Hazel smiled slightly. "This is Ghost 7, she said. "I hear you have a conspiracy that needs killing. Let's talk about range and windage." The war she had thought ended in Kandahar, the battle she had thought won in a coffee shop, was apparently just the opening skirmish in something much larger. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, she had a team, a purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important targets weren't 3,800 meters away, but hidden in plain sight among those sworn to protect. The story that had begun with mockery at a shooting range had become something none of them could have predicted, and as Hazel began planning her next move, she knew that the hardest shots were still to come. Not the ones measured in meters and calculated in milliseconds, but the ones that required looking into the darkness of institutional betrayal and deciding to fire anyway. Ghost 7 was more than a call sign now. It was a promise that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, could be brought to light. And Hazel, the woman who had been hiding in supply for 3 years, was just getting started.
nicht diese Töne, sondern lasst uns angenehmere anstehen.